Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again for Photo Live. My name is Elias Redstone, and I'm the Artistic Director of Photo 2021 International Festival of Photography. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung peoples of the Great Kulin Nations as the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today. I pay my deep respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and any Indigenous peoples that may be joining us here or watching live today. So we're here for Photo Live, which is our series of artist conversations about the social and cultural role photography plays in our lives. And I'm delighted to be joined by two artists I admire greatly, who are both featured in Photo 2021. First of all, to my near right, we have Danica Chappell. Danica is a Melbourne-based artist who creates photographs from slow, thoughtful exchanges between matter and process in her darkroom studio. Chappell's work has recently appeared in group and solo exhibitions, including New Matter, Recent Forms of Photography at the Art Gallery, New South Wales. And That's Our Shadow on the Moon at Caves Ari. She was the recipient of an Australian Council Arts Projects grant and is a shortlisted artist of the 2020 Bowness Photography Prize at the Monash Gallery of Art. For Photo 2021, she has been commissioned to make a new work that's been presented at the La Trobe Art Institute in Bendigo in a experimental collaboration that we'll be hearing about shortly. And on my far right, we have Eliza Hutchison. South African-born, Eliza is a Melbourne-based artist as well. And she uses photography to explore how truth and meaning can be manipulated and hybridized. Her experimental approach involves various modes of in-camera and algorithmic abstraction. She has recently exhibited in Australia and Asia with exhibitions including the National 2019 New Australian Art at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. For Photo 2021, Eliza was the photographer in residence at Parliament of Victoria and has created a new body of work in response to Parliament that's presented on the steps of Parliament just around the corner on Spring Street. Okay, so how this is going to work this evening is I'm going to invite both artists to introduce their practice and their projects for Photo 2021. We'll then have a conversation around that and open up questions to the audience as well. So I'm going to invite Danica to begin. So over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Elias. My name's Danica, and I'm an artist that lives and works in Naarm, Melbourne. And my project for Photo 2021 is on the lands of the Djajarong people, and I pay respects to the elders past and present. So I was invited by Dr. Kent Wilson, the Senior Curator of La Trobe Art Institute, I think early in 2019 or 18. Hard to remember back then, to what would I think about collaborating with a scientist to make a commission piece for Photo 2020, 2021. And I thought, this is really overwhelming and interesting, of course. So I mainly work in I work with light sensitivity. That's, I guess, the fundamental basis of my practice. I work in a dark room and I work with light and the interaction of materials and my body on various mediums of photography, historical, contemporary, analog processes. And over the time that I've been working in this way, I have extended into the daguerreotype, the wet plate, colour carbon, applying a modernist and avant-garde aesthetic, use of materials to record my performance, record my trace of my body, my hands, and the materials that I use to make essentially light shadows on paper or light shadows on transparencies or on metal, using various photographic processes. So when thinking about working with a scientist, I thought, well, this is an opportunity to really go back into the science of and those foundation processes and the history and where photography evolved out of, and to sort of make this exhibition kind of a celebration of photography, I guess, and what it was, how it transitioned from science through a commercial, portrait studio photography, to how interaction with the painters sort of interacted with the process to advance new ways of using it. And I guess essentially over the last 12 months or so, this is the culmination that has formed into the body of work titled Far From the Eye. So Dr. Donna Whelan is so fantastic. She, Kent, the education officer, Karen, and myself went to Donna's lab and in 2019, and Donna's amazing. She's set up this single molecule microscope that looks at phosphorescence and light using lasers and dichroics. And walking into this space was amazing. Like, there's these lasers just bouncing around through all these dichroics and hitting one particular point, coming together, focused, and then recorded. And Donna was showing us that, and she's built this from scratch. And Donna was showing us that the image that's actually recorded is an algorithm first, and then it goes through a process to become an image. So what we see then is this pictorial representation of code. So, that was kind of all new to me and fascinating. So then it was like, well, what do I want to do with this method? And so I had been recently working in Paris with another scientist who was studying Becquerel's, the first colour, positive colour science of recording colour in positive on silver plate. And it was Edmund Becquerel that started this. And these are heliochromy plates, and this image is actually how it looks, how the chemistry interacts with silver. And we put this in the dark field science, and we saw all of the nanoparticles interacting. So the thing with Becquerel's system of chemistry is that as soon as the light is recorded, the light kills the plate, so it kills the image. So we're blasting it with these lasers, and the image is activated but dying at the same time. So we're seeing these nanoparticles just going off and dying, and it was quite sad, but interesting. So I guess after doing that, I wanted to go back and into my darkroom, and I had sort of, wanted to push forward some daguerreotype plates. So these are Becquerel daguerreotypes. And they've got, when you see them in real life, a daguerreotype has a positive and a negative on the same surface. It's a very slippery viewing system of looking at a photograph, and you need to reflect it into black in order to see the resultant image, the positive image. When you're looking at it in the light, you're just seeing a highly polished, fuzzy type of image, that there's something there but you can't quite see. So that was kind of interesting to push after having worked with daguerreotypes. I wanted to then sort of extend through the boundary of the image, through the frame. So I don't feel like I'm held by frames and boundaries of process. I feel like I always am sitting on the edge and pushing outwards. And then, of course, I started to intermix that with the colour work, the chromogenic photographs, and you can see here a suite of both chromogenic and silver gelatin sitting next to each other with the daguerreotype plates. So it's quite an extensive exhibition. If you get up to Bendigo, please have a look. It goes through both Gallery 1 and 2, and then the facade and the hallway. So there's lots to see.
Thank you so much. We love providing opportunities for artists at Photo 2021 to make new work, but we really love to provide unique opportunities that they wouldn't be able to access otherwise. Collaborations like this and access to the Parliament of Victoria, which Eliza was privileged to be able to receive as part of the photography residence program at the Parliament of Victoria, the first one they've ever done. That has resulted in a new body of work being presented for the festival. Just before we move on to Eliza, these are images of the facade that you've created.
That's right.
And this is something I definitely want to come on to in the conversation, is what it means to present work at such scale and in a public space. And this is something that works across both of your projects here. So this is beautiful. Can you tell us a bit about it before we move on to Parliament?
So this really sort of incorporates both Donna's work and my work, and part of the collaborative process, Kent suggested, well, what do you think about skinning the building? And I thought, that's interesting. But I thought about it as not just skinning the building, but the glass has two sides and there's this vitrine behind. So for me, it was really, to incorporate the body and activate the viewing space. I wanted to make it like a sculpture. So I've incorporated advertising material, a photogram image, again, dichroics and clear vinyls that then lend itself to have a nighttime room for Donna's work to come forward and come out of that space. So it's this large interactive space that transitions between day and night.
So the image on the left is nighttime with glowing, with the sort of backlit.
It's a little disco in the night, yeah.
It's amazing. I love it. Okay. Should we...
I don't know, how do we get...
Was there anything else to go through there?
No.
Okay. Maybe if we just swap around so you can reach the computer. And then we can hear about Eliza's experience as photographer in residence at Parliament of Victoria, which, if you're not familiar with Melbourne, is just around the corner.
It's quite pixelated. Is it? Oh, it's that screen. Oh, look at this screen. Yeah, sure. It's a pretty amazing opportunity to be able to. It's been a pretty amazing opportunity to be able to engage with the Parliament in our contemporary times, because in terms of a commission as an artist to actually deal with something that has such an extensive effect on our life and the way we live, we understand ourselves. It was amazing to be able to sort of negotiate what was possible in this sort of collaboration with Parliament. Because in some senses, because it was novel, it was sort of, they were feeling their way out, their way around this idea of what an artist in residence would be. So. And also, I guess, because the photo festival had initiated that conversation with them, they were sort of, they were surprisingly open in many ways, but also, given the nature of any sort of institution like that, there's a lot of, everyone's fairly wary as well. And I think even the understanding of what a contemporary artist is within the broader spectrum of Parliament is sort of, well, you know, it's a concept that we're so familiar with that sort of is somewhat foreign to them, not so much to the public servants who oversaw the process, but more the politicians who were in part the subject of the work. But so it wasn't such an interesting process because I actually got to get access into that system and to understand more from the inside how the system worked. And I think one of the first tours that I took me up through the Hansard suites, and so if people understand, the Hansard actually documents what happens on the floor of the Parliament, and it also documents often committee meetings, which are all part of the process of laws being generated, and that they have committees and they do research on certain topics, and that subsequently becomes part of the process where laws are drawn up. So, and then with the Hansard suite, because it has numerous views on Parliament at any one time, it sort of really sparked this sort of creative, sparked my imagination, because basically that is a process that I do often use in my own work, where I draw from numerous sources at any one time and I put them together. And so, and then also with this, what is critical, as you can see, is the sense of display and how that display would work with that concept. So, and I was lucky enough to be able to put the work on the steps of the Parliament, so that brought another potential dynamic to the work, because in a sense, the steps of the Parliament is where all the petitions to Parliament and all the press conferences take place, and it's a real point of communication between the inside and the outside. And so not only did I go into Parliament and have opportunity to document certain aspects within the Parliament, I actually got the chance to hang around on the steps and take photographs. So I'll lead you on through. So it's the shape. It was a bit of a battle to kind of work out how to present the work, and I arrived on this idea of the arc, because basically the Australian Parliament developed. You know, the British Parliament the Australian Parliament is based on the British Parliament, which is has an arrangement where there's two swords go down, and it's quite adversarial, that sort of setup, whereas in Australia they have brought in the sort of curve at the end of the Parliament, which is more collegiate. So I was drawing on that idea as trying to bring the inside out and also the outside in. Just to start with this, one of my work often expands from the idea of the autobiographical. So I really start at that starting point, and I want to create various try to explore the narratives of Parliament in relation to my own life. And by doing that, I used a mixture of personal imagery with text messages from various friends and family within my life, and exploring the idea that in a sense our lives, even these random text messages are implicitly have a political content. So, but I'm mindful in terms of not to sort of, it was kind of a tricky line to draw, because you have to be careful not in any way to sort of draw out those parallels, but not obviously be offensive. Like you can't work. So say like this one here, which is, I can see, I don't know if you can read the text can you read the text on the screen? But one is a text from my daughter asking me to sign her out of school, and saying, oh, you know, like, I don't mind if you don't, but I really prefer if you could sign me out of school. And sort of like, and then it's pitted against, you know, various bits of text from the legislation telling you, you know, like you can't, in terms of vagrancy and not going to school. So all these kind of beautiful things, this personal, and these texts were often taking place while I was in, you know, doing the project, and it's sort of these interesting sort of juxtapositions between the personal and the political.
If I may, Eliza.
Should I run through? Because I'm going to, do you want me to speed through?
Sure.
Yeah.
I was just going to add, what I really like about your work and your project here is it really reflects how we, first of all, how we all consume politics and news stories nowadays. Once upon a time, we were probably all sat at the TV and we broadcast out, into our homes, and we would be consuming that. Nowadays, we consume it in the same breath as we do our family conversations, our gossip with our friends, our Googling for facts about what may be popping up on the news at the same time. And this barrage of information kind of hits us all at once, often on one screen. And that's what you so eloquently have communicated in this project, both breaking down how we consume media, but also by having this privileged position of being both on the floor of Parliament, in the Hansard suite, that's normally the control centre for what gets broadcast out, as well as on the steps of Parliament, and all this with what's going on in your personal life at the same time, kind of brought into one body of work. So effortlessly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think the thing is, because often I would, just in terms of how I work, I'd look at things on the screen and I think, oh my God, I just really love the way that blue fades to yellow or, to orange. Or so in a sense, each screen became like a painting. So not only did it record all those traces of human communications, it's like literally my daughter screaming at me, Mum, would you sort of answer the text messages? But then it's also played into sort of idea from my mother talking about her garden suffering under the bushfires. That's that close up. And then there's these interesting, I really loved this particular politician when I went in, because someone interviewed me previously and said, so what politicians did you photograph? And I actually couldn't, I said, look, really, I wasn't looking for any particular politician, I was looking for a sentiment. So the thing is, with all the images of Parliament, I'm really actually obsessed with work of Frederick Wiseman, who is a documentary filmmaker, and he used to have he did all these amazing documentaries in institutional spaces, and I think one of the beautiful, I really loved the aesthetics of the work, but I think in some ways it's influenced, say, the image of the politician here in the committee room. I love the way that, in a sense, he looked like a medieval, the sort of almost painterly character of his face, as well as the sentiment on his face. And then that's played against this variance between the church and state and the politics, because, they come to bear, because that's actually a picture of the democracy tree, which is quite an interesting story in itself, but we probably don't have time to go into that. But
I think in brief, it's the Federation tree?
Yeah, the Federation
Oak.
tree, yeah.
It was a bit gnarly, so often people photograph the other oak that looks more green and looks like it's flourishing. So there's this whole story around what the real oak is.
Yeah, which is the real oak. And then, so there's actually a shot from the Hansard on the floor with various screens revealing themselves. And then I really loved this one too, is another view into the Hansard suite, and then it's that really inside outside. And this my daughter sent me a text about broken windows, because her boyfriend had fallen through one of the glass windows at home, and then she sent to me, and I said, how did you go? And she said, no broken windows, but it has this beautiful narrative, even though it's like a personal incident in relation to what was going on, say, because this work was actually made during the storming of the Capitol, so that this sort of idea of protest, because this is one of the protesters that I took from the outside, and then a picture of the Hansard suite on the inside. So there's all these kind of slippages that I loved in the work, and then just even the framing around that image is like the glow from the Hansard suite. So it's sort of using photography. I love the nexus between photography as a painterly pursuit, and the idea of the collage of these multiple views that come to bear at one point. So that's that one close note.
Thanks a lot, Eliza.
Yeah,
that's fantastic. Well, as we can see, both of you have been thrown into different spheres of science, politics, and everything that relates to that. Danica, can we start with you maybe? And if you can kind of tell us a bit about what that actually means as an artist working with photography, to be incorporating a whole different discipline into your work. Was it something that came seamlessly to you, or how did you go about even thinking about that within your practice?
Yeah, look, I really I found it quite daunting to begin with because, you know, I mean, science, I don't know anything about science. In fact, I've probably failed science, you know. So I know scientists, but I'm not science-y. So I thought, oh, what am I going to do? Like, how am I going to incorporate this into my, into my practice? But it's like, well, it was just the perfect storm to be able to blend and bring new things in, really. And I guess to then think about, like, particularly how Donna records images digitally as opposed to my analogue. But I guess I was looking really for the intersections between our working processes as an initial starting point. And the first thing that was really obvious was that we both used dichroic film and lenses, and we're bending light and, manipulating light and really sort of I'm putting my hands into the light, whereas, there's this kind of manipulation of material that Donna's doing to be able to capture these really tiny, like insanely tiny particles on a slide. So this thing of scale was also apparent as a crossover. And
if you were to hazard a guess, what do you think she would have taken from this collaboration, working with an artist so intimately?
Yeah, I think Donna, I caught up with her on Tuesday when we finally finished the window install, and she was thrilled to sort of have that, I guess, respite from science to have another way of thinking. I think we both, another thing that I found that we both sort of work with this, the experiential nature of looking and feeling through boundaries and crossovers and the edges of things, I think. I think we both sit quite comfortably in places of not knowing stuff and figuring things out, and using our hands and our bodies to do that, I think. So she was rapt.
Amazing. Eliza, how about you? So your work has always merged and brought together the political and the personal, but this time around you were thrown into Victoria's sort of democratic heart. What did it mean for your practice to have that kind of access to political systems and a site, a venue of politics and democracy to incorporate into your work?
I think the interesting thing is the point to which you could basically, as it became this really dynamic process, and I think that's the thing, because as an artist you're normally just given free range, like to do whatever you want to do, but like in that sense it had an interesting scenario where there was, there's various amounts of pushback depending on, what I'd kind of do in the various processes that I went through. And I think that became a really interesting process in itself, because the thing is you're always mediating, thinking, analysing what you're doing, and also unlike classic viewers in a gallery, you've got all these other people with vested interests in terms of how the work is going to be read, which is quite an interesting thing as an artist, and it sort of opens up ideas about how other people read what you're doing, in a very conscious way. So I think that was really kind of beneficial, and just actually being corralled into having to have a response to a very particular thing. I always think it's been a really creative process, because you have to. It gives you a sort of parameters to work to, and I think that was really useful, for me.
And you mentioned the publicness of the work, which is, I believe, a new departure for both of you, to be presenting work both in the public realm like this, on the street, literally on the street, as well as at a large scale. I mean, it's several meters tall and wide, each work.
Yeah.
How does that make you think about the work that you're actually presenting and how you wanted to use that opportunity to operate at that urban scale? Maybe Danica, you go first.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's 7 meters by 4.5 meters, and it's inside, outside, and there's a vitrine behind. So, I was working with a little maquette in the studio that was, a 1 to 37.5 ratio, because that's all I had to hand. And so I was building this little maquette, and I was like changing it and putting it up to the light and seeing if the materials would work and researching the materials and going to the sign company and getting samples and wondering how I could. So the actual material that I've photographed onto an E6 slide, but I'm only using a portion of that. So to take that and to get a high quality scanned image was the hurdle to begin with. How am I going to actually get my images that big when I don't know anything about scanning or digital? So Colour Factory really helped me out. They pointed me in the right direction, and I got a drum scan done. And so then it was about like carving away and letting some other elements come through, and then building Donna's work into it to sort of complement and, I guess, bring this. I guess it's a portrait, really. I mean, when you look at it, it's a bit of a Picasso-type portrait, and so, it's a bit of a portrait of both Donna and I in this large-scale thing, but the way that it interacts with the dichroics. So in the morning, the sun is beaming onto this thing, and the dichroics are mirrored, so they bounce like these beautiful light shadows onto the concrete, and it really sort of brings the concrete up into this facade. And people, Kent was sort of saying, I just went outside and somebody's like looking at this thing on the ground and looking up and realising that this is where the light comes from. And this fascination with light is what I tend to do. I trace light back to its source to figure out what's creating a shadow or what's creating the light. Or so I guess, bringing those elements in and then putting them on the street to then bring the viewer within that space and to invite them to look in, and then for it to transition overnight. Like, it's quite a complex piece, really. So, yeah.
Thank you. We're about to open up to the audience for questions. So if you do have some questions, just wave your hands at me. Eliza, your presentation on the steps of Parliament, the material itself is printed on a form of very sort of like robust vinyl. There's scaffolding, there's concrete blocks, there's structure that holds it all together. I mean, you normally, for everything I've seen, have either presented work in a gallery or in book form. How do you feel this has, how has your practice adapted to this form of presentation?
Well, it's interesting because I actually, when I went to art school, I originally studied sculpture. So I've always really had that drive towards that medium. So the thing is, and I've always had a fascination about the nexus between photography and sculpture, because when I was studying sculpture and I wanted to do photography as my comp prac, everyone would say, this is, in the 90s, they'd say, oh, but sculpture and photography, why would you want to do that combination? Because it wasn't really offered to sculptors at the time. So I think the thing is, it's a really great opportunity. It's so sort of concrete an opportunity to have display work outside. And because my husband works in public art, so his work always has this longevity out, beyond just like a gallery show. And I sort of thought, it'd be really great. And he always really encouraged me to apply to do a public piece. And I think so that marrying of that sort of interest in sculpture and photography and what the possibilities of their combination could be, I've explored that in sort of some earlier pieces where I've used kind of slashed up images and created sculptures from them. But this was really another realm. So it really, and I was really wanting to explore the notion of display and how you can, the display, because obviously there could be images involved, and how that display became meaningful as well as sculptural. So, and I was really happy with it in the end, because I thought it has the gravitas, and it kind of really has to deal with that building, because there's such a strong relationship with the building, the way the form was evolved, and also just all the structures of the building sort of, and how they relate to the images, because, you know, there's images of columns in and out through the work. So it has that sort of tie back to the building.
Yeah, it's a very nuanced, rich project that takes, that really rewards viewing. Do we have any questions from the audience? We do. Okay, let's just get the microphone to you.
Just to expand on the installation, the construction with the scaffolding and the concrete structures, are you telling any story with that installation?
Yeah, it is, because in a sense, as I said earlier, you know, it mirrors that form of the end of Parliament, the Australian Parliament, where the two sides are coming, you know, like where it's more collegiate, and the two sides are coming together in a more cohesive form. So, and because I was just playing with the inside and the outside, and also the fracturing of the narrative, because the way that curve works, you know, instead of seeing the images butted up against each other, it's much more fractured. Like and it gives each one space as well, because the thing is, if you have them all together, it's almost too much. But because you've got that space of the curve, it sort of allows them to breathe between. So, and also the monumental nature of the concrete blocks. Which was like, you know, it's great in one way, because there's such huge wind loadings up there. So you had to have really something substantial to sort of locate them. And also I didn't want to design a structure that would just become a big waste of money. I wanted to use found objects that could be assembled and disassembled, and it wasn't going to cost a lot of money, and it was going to be, but really do the job. But so we designed it very carefully up beforehand, and actually when it came up on the steps, I thought, oh, I can't believe it worked, because it's the first time I'd seen it up, and, you know, it all kind of it seemed to sort of work with the building, because it's such a big building to sort of set something up again, so.
I think that that approach to the scale, like, you can't believe it worked. Like, when I first saw the work at La Trobe on the facade, I was like, oh my God, it's actually taking shape as I imagined it to take shape in the maquette. So it's quite an overwhelming sensation.
Okay, unless there's any final burning questions, we are running out of time. I didn't see any hands, so I think I'm going to wrap it up here. I urge you all to go and see Eliza's work. I wanted you to know, outside the Parliament of Victoria, it's on view 24/7 until the 7th of March. And do make it up to Bendigo to see Far From the Eye, Danica Chappell's stunning exhibition and facade at the La Trobe Art Institute. Open during gallery hours, but as we can see, also a treat after dark. So
absolute treat after dark.
So go and stay the night. That just leaves me to, first of all, say join us here in 15 minutes as we have Phoebe Powell and Kate Disher-Quill talk about the incredible project working with healthcare workers on the front line of the fight against COVID here in Victoria. But in the meantime, please join me in a big round of applause to thank Eliza Hutchison and Danica Chappell. Thank you so much.